Kyoto, June 1582. The man who had nearly unified all of Japan woke to find his own general's army surrounding his temple. Is this treachery or madness? The answer came in flames. His body was never found. How did the Demon King come so close?
One morning in 1582, the man closest to unifying Japan woke to find his own general's army surrounding him. He asked one question: is this treachery or madness? His temple burned to the ground. His body was never found. Oda Nobunaga was born in 1534 in Owari province, the son of a minor warlord. As a young man, he was known as the Fool of Owari, wandering the streets eating, dressed carelessly, acting with no apparent dignity. His own father died worried about him. But what looked like madness was something else entirely. Nobunaga was already watching, calculating, and waiting for his moment. The fool's eyes were always cold and sharp.
In 1560, Nobunaga faced his defining test. Imagawa Yoshimoto, one of Japan's most powerful lords, marched on Owari with an army of 25,000 men. Nobunaga had roughly 2,000. Every advisor said to surrender or retreat. Instead, Nobunaga studied weather reports, waited for a violent thunderstorm to break, then led a lightning raid directly into the enemy camp. Yoshimoto was dead before he knew what had happened. The Fool of Owari was finished. The Demon King had arrived.
Okehazama transformed Nobunaga from a provincial lord into a national force. Through relentless military and diplomatic campaigns, he expanded his territory across central Japan. In 1568, he entered Kyoto and installed a puppet shogun. 5 years later, he discarded even that pretense, expelling the last Ashikaga shogun in 1573, ending a dynasty that had ruled Japan for over 2 centuries. Nobunaga had no interest in inheriting the old order. He intended to replace it entirely.
Nobunaga was the first Japanese warlord to grasp what European firearms could truly do. Portuguese traders had brought matchlock arquebuses to Japan in the 1540s, but other lords treated them as novelties. Nobunaga saw a weapon that could destroy traditional samurai warfare. He ordered mass production of thousands of guns, built specialist infantry units to use them, and developed new tactics around their power. The sword that had defined Japanese combat for centuries was about to meet something that did not care about honor or lineage. Japan's great Buddhist monasteries were not merely religious institutions. They were political powers, military forces, and landowners who had defied central authority for generations. In 1571, Nobunaga ordered the complete destruction of Enryakuji, the great temple complex on Mount Hiei near Kyoto. He surrounded the mountain, and burned everything: monasteries, shrines, and the villages on its slopes. Thousands died. The message was unambiguous. No institution, sacred or secular, was beyond his reach. No one challenged him again on religious grounds.
The decisive test came in 1575 at the Battle of Nagashino. The Takeda clan, legendary for the finest cavalry in Japan, attacked with thousands of mounted samurai. Nobunaga deployed 3,000 arquebusiers behind wooden palisades in rotating firing lines. One rank shooting, while two others reloaded in sequence, creating unbroken fire. The Takeda cavalry charged again and again into an unceasing wall of lead. By the end of the afternoon, the greatest mounted force in Japan had been effectively destroyed. The age of cavalry was over.
Nobunaga's vision extended beyond conquest. At Azuchi, on the shores of Lake Biwa, he built the most advanced castle Japan had ever seen. 7 stories of stone and gold, its walls covered in painted dragons and celestial beings. But its true significance was symbolic. He abolished the road tolls that had strangled trade for generations. He established free markets. He welcomed Christian missionaries and their foreign knowledge. Nobunaga was not just conquering Japan. He was building something that had never existed before. By 1582, Nobunaga controlled roughly a third of Japan and had broken every significant rival in central Honshu. His generals were closing the remaining gaps: Toyotomi Hideyoshi pushing west, Shibata Katsue pressing north. Nobunaga himself rarely fought anymore. He directed, planned, and delegated with the cold efficiency of a man who had turned war into an administrative function. He was not merely winning battles. He was dismantling the entire feudal structure that had defined Japan for 500 years. The end was in sight.
One of Nobunaga's finest generals was Akechi Mitsuhide. Educated, meticulous, devoted to protocol and tradition. For years, he served loyally. But Nobunaga's treatment of Mitsuhide was volatile. Public mockery, sudden removal from commands, humiliations in front of other lords. In June 1582, Mitsuhide was ordered to march his forces west to reinforce Hideyoshi's campaign. Instead, he addressed his assembled army with 13 simple words. The enemy awaits at Honnoji. He turned 13,000 soldiers east, toward Kyoto, toward Nobunaga.
The night of June 20th, 1582, Nobunaga was staying at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto with a personal guard of perhaps 30 men, a fraction of his usual forces, which were deployed across Japan. He had no reason to expect danger this deep inside his own territory. Before dawn, 13,000 soldiers surrounded the temple walls. When arrows began falling into the compound, a retainer rushed to wake Nobunaga. He rose, looked at the chaos, and asked his famous question: is this treachery or madness? Both answers
were equally fatal.
Nobunaga fought. With 30 men against thousands, he took up a spear and held the main courtyard as long as he could. When the outer rooms caught fire, he retreated deeper into the temple, wounded in the arm by an arrow. Witnesses later reported seeing him playing a flute as the flames rose around him. Some accounts say he withdrew to an inner room and chose to die by his own hand rather than be taken alive. The temple burned to the ground. Morning came. The smoke cleared.
When Mitsuhide's soldiers searched the ruins of Honnoji, they found bones, weapons, and personal effects, but nothing that could be definitively identified as Nobunaga's remains. No body, no death verified. The theories multiplied immediately. That he had escaped through a hidden passage, that loyal retainers had hidden his ashes, that he had staged his own disappearance. History records his death as fact, but the man who had shaken Japan to its foundations left behind nothing. Just smoke, ash, and 4 centuries of questions.
Akechi Mitsuhide now held Kyoto, the imperial court, and the greatest prize in Japan. He sent messengers to the major warlords seeking recognition and alliance. He waited for the political world to reorganize itself around his victory. It did not. The other lords calculated in silence. Some prepared for war. And far to the west, the fastest calculator of all had already received the news and made his decision. Toyotomi Hideyoshi broke off his campaign, turned his army around, and began force marching east at impossible speed.
Toyotomi Hideyoshi marched 300 kilometers in under 5 days, a feat of military logistics that astonished everyone. He reached the outskirts of Kyoto before Mitsuhide could consolidate his position. At the Battle of Yamazaki, Mitsuhide's forces collapsed in hours. Fleeing north afterward, Mitsuhide was reportedly attacked and killed by bandits, an inglorious end for the man who had briefly held all of Japan in his hands. His 13 days of power were over. In Japanese history, the phrase 13 days became synonymous with the shortest reign imaginable. Even in death, Nobunaga's work could not be undone. He had abolished the road tolls strangling Japanese commerce. He had broken the military power of the Buddhist monasteries forever. He had introduced firearms as a permanent feature of Japanese warfare. He had ended the Ashikaga shogunate and the entire system of fragmented warlord rule that had defined Japan for 2 centuries. The unified Japan that followed, under Hideyoshi, then Tokugawa Ieyasu, was built directly on the foundations that Nobunaga had destroyed and replaced. His successors inherited a country he had already remade. What if Nobunaga had survived Honnoji? Historians have debated this endlessly. He showed none of the political patience that Tokugawa Ieyasu would use to stabilize Japan for 2.5 centuries. His Japan might have been more commercially aggressive, more open to Western trade and Christianity, possibly more expansionist toward Korea and China. Documents suggest he was already planning foreign campaigns. Nobunaga's Japan was the road not taken, and arguably the most consequential fork in Japanese history.
the Tokugawa peace that followed was in many ways a reaction against everything he represented.
His enemies called him the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven, a Buddhist reference to the Lord of Destruction and Desire. Nobunaga apparently embraced the title, stamping official documents with the phrase, "Rule the realm by force." And yet, the same man who burned Enryakuji also protected Christian missionaries, commissioned extraordinary artwork, and built a castle of unprecedented beauty. Nobunaga was simultaneously destroyer and builder. And 4 centuries later, Japan is still living in the political, commercial, and military world that he tore down and rebuilt from nothing.
Next time on Samurai Chronicles, the man who inherited Nobunaga's unfinished dream and carried it further than anyone imagined possible. Born a peasant with no family name, he died the undisputed ruler of all Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the most unlikely conqueror in history. If Nobunaga's story gripped you, subscribe to Samurai Chronicles for a new episode every day. Drop a comment. If the Demon King had survived Honnoji, would Japan have become a completely different country? We'll see you in the next battle.